Welcome back to the Love You Sew YouTube channel. Today we are going to sew the honeycomb case. For all of my patterns, you can visit loveyousewpatterns.com or click the links provided in the description of this video. The honeycomb case is a slim organizer that is packed with pockets. It comes in 3 different sizes to handle all of your gear, and we are going to sew the medium size today. The medium is a great size to start if you are sewing this pattern for the very first time. It economizes your materials while still being able to manage those curves and zipper installations the best. Sometimes when you work with small, intricate designs, it gets really tight and then difficult to sew. So that's why I think making the medium is the best one to start. And then you have the large, which deals with a lot more fabric. So if you're going to make mistakes, the medium is going to be the way to go. Now it's time for us to dive right in. We are going to take an inventory of all of our pattern pieces, starting first with the body, main, and lining fabrics. You'll notice that all of the pieces have been interfaced beforehand. Then we have the zipper tabs. I'm going to go over the ribbon and the fabric versions. Then we have the slip pockets, both in lining fabrics, and then the pleated pockets. You'll notice that the lining fabrics are 2 different ones so that we can easily show the differences for video purposes. Then we have the tab closure and then the honeycomb slots. You'll see the non-interfaced bottoms of the honeycomb slots, and then we have the binding left over. Then we have our zipper cut to size along with the 2 pulls needed. We have our snaps. These are the cam style plastic ones. And then of course our foam. This is highly recommended over the fleece just for some good structure. And now it's time to get right into it. We are going to create the exterior. Grab the body mains and place them right sides together. Then you will sew along the bottom edge and make sure that you backstitch well. Then it's time to take the body main over to your pressing area. Remember to clip the corners beforehand. That helps to reduce bulk later when assembling the entire case. You want to make sure you press well, and then optionally you can sew the seam allowances down as shown. Now it's time to grab your body main and place it wrong sides together with your foam or fleece if you have a wrong side to your foam or fleece. Then you will take it over to your machine and baste it all together. Now you will make sure to mark off the corner cutouts because the seam allowance is a little bigger at 1/4 of an inch versus the basting, which is all done around the curves at 1/8 of an inch. Again, at the corner cutouts, the seam allowance is 1/4, and then around the curves it is 1/8 of an inch. And you will see later why we need it to be a little bit larger. Once everything is basted together, then you will trim all the way around the body main. This allows your foam to fit perfectly to your body main, and then you only have to cut it out once and not have to go back and retrim. Now with the corner cutouts, we're going to trim away the foam within the seam allowances. So you can see I have my duck billed scissors. You can see that there is one blade that is much larger than the other. It allows your blade to really get underneath the foam and carry that foam up so that you do not risk cutting into your main fabric. So this is great for grading, but you can also use small precision tip scissors to do the same exact thing. And now we're going to move on to prepping the zipper and adding it to the body main. You can see that I have marked where I need to cut the zipper and have cut it a little bit longer than what's needed, because in order to finish my zippers, I like to melt them with a lighter, and then you lose a little bit of the zipper that way. So it's always good to cut just a tad more than you need, because you don't want to end up with losing too much of that tape. Using a lighter is definitely my preferred way to melt down this zipper tape and to seal it. I like to also use pliers instead of my fingers, because I have definitely burnt the tips of them many times. Now you want to grab your ruler and mark each end of the zipper straight across the teeth, and you want to do this with 1 inch, because that is going to mark your tails later. Then you want to match up those 1 inch markings and then find your center. And then once you find your center, you just want to make sure that the markings stay within the seam allowance and that you're not marking too far, because they will then get covered once you start sewing. Then it's time to separate the zipper into its 2 parts. Grab your body main and then find that top center notch, and then it's time to start matching up the zipper with right sides together. I like to always pin my center marking to make sure that it doesn't shift, because clips tend to shift a little bit, and so for the parts that I like to really anchor in, I will always pin them. Then each corner matches up at the 1 inch marking. Then it's time to ease the rest of the zipper into place. I like to always work on the anchor points and then the straight parts of my zipper first. After clipping those into place, then I will work on easing the zipper into those corners. Now you can do this 2 ways. You can either push the fabric of the body main to fit into that zipper, which kind of creates a little bit of volume, or you can follow my instructions, which allows you to sew with the zipper being a little bit more flat. And this is done by clipping into the zipper with 1/8 or less little snips, and then that spreads out the zipper so that it can sit underneath your presser foot more flat. I know some people do not like snipping into your zipper, but if you grab a good quality zipper tape, then you will have that nice tight weave and it will hold up better against a curve. Time to head back to the machine. You can see that the second side of the zipper was added to the other side of the body main. Now we're going through and basting the zipper onto the body main. With this first curve, the notches have been cut into the zipper, so you can see that it sews up pretty smoothly. And then on the next corner, which we haven't gotten to yet, this one right here, it is not notched into the corner, so there is a little bit of volume pushed up into that body main, and there is a lot of stress onto the zipper because we did not notch it. And so you have to be really careful here just to make sure that you have a balance of really matching the zipper to the body main and also not trying to create any extra folds or ripples in the fabric as you go. And now you can see the difference between sewing the notched and then the unnotched side. And I do have a little bit of a mistake in that last corner, but we'll fix it later. Now we're going to move on to the zipper tabs. I'm going to go through both the fabric and the ribbon versions. So first we have the fabric version right here. You have the long sides of the zipper tabs right sides together, and then you will sew along that long seam. Then you will clip the corners for bulk reduction and then flip this right side out. If you have a tube turner, that is a great tool to use to get this right side out, or you can just break open your regular safety pin and that will do the job as well. To keep the zipper tabs flat as possible, you want to be able to open up those seam allowances. So I used a bone folder in order to help open up those seam allowances. Then you want to press well with the iron and then cut the tabs into 2 equal pieces. With the cut that we just made, separating the fabric into 2 zipper tabs, we now have to go back and cut out those seam allowance corners once again to reduce bulk. You will get a little close up, and I am going to cut into seam allowance corners, and then you will fold the tabs together with the seams facing each other and then head over to the machine in order to baste them together. If you have a domestic machine that does not work well with lots of layers, I highly recommend going through and adding the ribbon as your zipper tabs. As you can see, I have my one piece of ribbon. Cut it in half, and then you will just fold them wrong sides together and sew those short ends together. Just remember to seal up the ends of the ribbons so that they do not unravel as you work with them. Set the zipper tabs aside, and now it is pocket time. Take your 2 slip pocket linings and place them right sides together. Make sure all of the long edges are aligned, and then you will sew at the top seam and also at the bottom seam. With the pleated pockets, you will do the same and match them right sides together. Just make sure that you have the top edges aligned with top edges, and then the non-interfaced bottom edges are also matched up together. Then you will do the same and run a seam along the top and along the bottom edges of the pleated pocket. All of the pockets, you want to make sure that you clip those corners to reduce bulk as always and snip away any loose threads. Then it is time to flip both the slip pocket and the pleated pocket right side out. Make sure that those sewn seams are finger pressed well and that they're not wonky in any way. Just want to make sure that they are nice and straight. Once you finger press them, make sure to go over with your iron for a nice crisp finish. Now we're back at the machine, and you want to just top stitch only the top edge of your slip pocket and then only the top edge of your pleated pocket. Remember that non-interfaced edge of the pleated pocket is that bottom edge. stitch. So I'm just double checking and making sure that I top stitch the right side. Now it's time to grab your body lining and make sure that all of your markings are in place. So you have the marking placement for the slip pocket, and then you want to make sure that you have the center markings of both the body lining and then the slip pocket, because those will all need to match. With the slip pocket matched up to all of the proper markings and notches, it is time to sew the slip pocket bottom edge into place. And once you are done with the bottom edge, then you can sew that divider line to split the slip pocket in two. Make sure to back stitch well. Now, since the slip pocket is a little oversized, you can actually push a little bit of volume into the slip pocket by pushing the top edge toward the center divider by just about 1/8 to maybe 1/4 inch, and then that will give you a little bit more room for your accessories later. Pushing the extra volume is not part of the instructions, and this is just a little tip that you can do with any type of slip pocket. With the sides of the slip pockets basted, then it is time to trim off all of the excess threads and then to trim the slip pocket to match the sides of the body lining. Set the slip pocket aside, and then we will move on to the pleated pocket. You can see that the pleated markings are in place, and you want to fold at the pleated markings with the wrong sides together. It's nice to always finger press and then use your iron for a heat press to get those sharp lines. Then with the folds, you want to push them in to meet up at that center marking. Again, finger press and then use a iron in order to get that nice sharp fold. Once the pleated pocket has completely cooled down, then you will want to take it over to your remaining body lining. Make sure that the center markings are all matched up again, and then you will pin the pleated pocket into place. And then with the pleated pocket, you want to sew that divider line first. Definitely make sure to backstitch well for all of the tension that is going to occur at this pocket. And then you want to fold the pleats back into place, and then make sure the bottom edges of that pleated pocket match up with the placement line on the body lining. Then you will sew along that bottom seam in order to close up the bottom edge of the pocket. Then it is time to baste those sides all into place. And just like with the slip pocket, you will cut off any hanging threads and then cut off the excess pleated pocket to match up with the body lining. And now it's time to move on to the tab closure, and I'm going to use a little bit of stick glue in order to help me out here. With the tab closure, you want to fold up those long edges to meet at the center and then press with an iron. But of course, after pressing, these edges will want to come back up, and that is where I like to have the glue. You can take your glue stick and swipe it toward the inside of the tab closure, and that will help keep those edges laid down so that we can fold the tab closure one more time, matching up the short ends. I love using the stick glue because it is easy to use and is easy to sew through without being as goopy and thick as fabric glue is. With everything clipped together, you will want to edge stitch along all of the sides of the tab closure. Now you want to grab one of your honey slot linings and find that double notch where you are going to place your tab closure with the right side up. Make sure that it is centered over those double notches, and then you will baste it into place. Make sure that the tab closure is at the top of your honeycomb slot lining, because the bottom should be the non-interfaced edge. Then you want to take that second honeycomb lining and make sure that you match up every single notch together. It's important that all of the notches match, because you do not want the honeycomb lining to shift as we sew. Back at the machine, we will sew along that top edge with a regular seam allowance. You will notice that on your left, you should see the uninterfaced edge of the honeycomb slots, which are not being sewn right now. Just make sure that the notches stay in place as you sew, and then you want to clip those corners to reduce bulk. At this point, you should iron the seam allowances to open them up, but right now I am just going to finger press them to show you the next step. You will match up the short edges of the honeycomb slots now, and also match up that seam that you just sewed. Then you will match the rest of that short side together with itself, and once everything is aligned, it is back to the machine. Sew that short seam with a regular seam allowance, making sure that you backstitch very well over that connected seam. And then in order to reduce bulk, we're going to cut into this seam allowance where the two fabrics are connected, and then we are going to cut out a little triangle to make sure that this edge is going to lay flat later on, and that you won't have a huge knob when making these honeycomb slots. Open up that side seam and really make sure that everything is flattened out when you want to fold that edge up later. So I've taken everything over to my little pressing station, and I have a ham in place since this is now a loop. That kind of makes things a little bit easier to press. And then I like to place my fingers right where the intersecting seams meet, and that helps kind of keep all of those seam allowances in place. And then before we match up all of the seams, we're going to clip away those seam allowance corners one more time to again reduce all of the bulk. Then it's time to finger press all of the top edges of the honeycomb slots while also matching up that side seam. Finger pressing just allows all of the seams to sit flat first before we have to iron. Then with everything already ironed, you want to make sure that all of your bottom notches also meet up. This is especially important along this uninterfaced edge, because if you do not have them matched up, one side will tend to stretch and shift while the other doesn't move, and then that can lead to some rippling that is not very pleasant. Then it is back at the machine to first top stitch along your folded edge, and then while you are at the machine, you want to make sure to baste the bottom edge together. Again, making sure that all of the notches match and that none of the layers are shifting as you sew. With the honeycomb slots top stitched and then basted, you will shift your closure tab to be on a fold. It doesn't matter whether it's on the left or the right hand side. You just want to fold your slots so that the tab closure is on a fold. And then you'll see that that side seam has shifted in. We're going to make sure that it matches with a notch, and then the fold here on the right side is actually going to sit on a notch as well. What happens is that the side seam is going to be a segment, and then the other divider marking, which is going to sit over the notches, is going to be another segment. So then the honeycomb slots are going to be split into 3 equal sections. Once everything looks good, we are going to sew directly on top of first this divider marking, and we're just going to make sure that the layers do not shift as we sew and backstitch very well at the top. Then you will shift over to the side seam where you will stitch in the ditch. I always like to shorten my stitch just a touch shorter than what I sewed the side seam as, and that will just make sure that we are really getting in between those stitches. And once these seams are sewn, you will begin to stack them on top of each other. So you'll see that the side seam, that divider marking is all going to line up with the center of the closure tab. And then once everything is stacked together, you'll see that the 3 slots are starting to come together, and they should all be the same size. You'll see also that the side seam is now hidden from you, so it looks like you have a really smooth looking finish. Clip the sides of the honeycomb slots together, and then we're going to baste the bottom edges. With a hump jumper in hand, you are going to definitely need this plus your regular presser foot in order to baste the bottom edges of the honeycomb slot. You want to make sure that that presser foot is nice and even, because with this bulk it can easily start drifting away. And before we move on, we are going to add the snaps to the honeycomb slots. In the instructions, I have some metal snaps, and with this video, I'm going to add the cam plastic snaps, which I know a lot of you have, and I don't think I have shown in a video yet. What I like to do is to use an awl to create the openings for these snaps. This just pushes the fibers away and allows for a better hold. Then the female side of the snap goes onto the tab closure itself, while the male side of the snap goes onto the front of the honeycomb slot. Links for all these products will always be found in the description of this video. And as always, make sure to test these snaps before moving on to the next step. Now grab your slip pocket and the honeycomb slots. Place the front of the honeycomb slots right sides together with the slip pocket and match the bottom center notches together. You want to make sure that you clip this very well since those honeycomb slots are pretty bulky. Then it's time to sew a seam all the way across the honeycomb slots. You'll see that I have my zipper foot now in place because I want to make sure that this is a nice, straight, precise seam. I'm also showing you that if you do not have a hump jumper, you can always use a scrap piece of fabric and just fold it over multiple times to be the same thickness of the fabric that you are sewing. So if you don't have a hump jumper right now, you can always make one out of fabric, but I still would recommend you having it for the future. Then you will grab your pleated pocket and place it right sides together with the honeycomb slots and the slip pocket. Again, you want to match up that center bottom notch and clip well. And then when you head over to the machine, you want to make sure that you have your previous stitching right side up facing you. And with all this bulk, sometimes your machine wants to push one layer more than the other. So that is why I have pinned on both sides of the honeycomb slots. I want to make sure that all the layers are moving evenly with each other. Then I use the blue pen to mark where I'm going to overlap my stitches by about a 1/4 of an inch. Again, I'm using my folded fabric as a hump jumper and back stitching incredibly well because that is going to be a high tension point when we flip this bag right side out. Then you want to skip and leave a nice opening in the center of the honeycomb slots and then finish sewing the seams on the other side of that blue marking that I had made. If you are making the small version, please note that you will be closing up this entire seam. There will be no opening to turn the pouch because you will be turning the pouch right side out through the corner cutouts later. Now with the bag lining face up, you can see that there is an opening for turning later. Then you want to press the seam allowance open. You want to make sure that the honeycomb slot seam allowance is facing up toward the slip pockets, and you want to press that seam allowance well. And another little trick I have is to glue down using our school glue the seam allowance of the pleated pocket. This just allows for easier handling again when we turn the bag right side out later. And then don't forget to clip the corners in the seam allowances of your body linings. Then it's back at the machine where you will top stitch the seam allowance of the honeycomb slots to the seam allowance of the slip pockets. At this point, you are going through a good amount of bulk and you might have to increase your stitch length to get through all of these layers. Again, a hump jumper is going to help you at the beginning and at the end of the seam. We are almost toward the end. It is time to assemble the case. And just as a reminder, this is the one corner where we basted in the zipper tape without notching it, and this is the corner where we did notch. So you will see that the notch side is laying more flat while the unnotched side has a little bit of rippling. Then you want to grab your body lining and match the center top notch with the center top notch of the body main. Then you want to match up all of the corners again because I don't want anything shifting. I am making sure that I pin those 3 spots. Then I will use my clips to clip the straight edges and then ease the rest into the corner. We are only going to work one side of the honeycomb case at a time to make sure that we have space for the honeycomb slots to go. Then at the machine, you are going to use your zipper foot or the narrow presser foot that I have here. I always like to use my narrow presser foot just because I feel like I can see a little bit better on the curves and I can anticipate when I need to pivot my fabric at the curve. So you can see with every stitch, I'm moving slowly around in order for you to make sure that you have a nice seamless curve. And if you have notched into your zipper tape, you want to make sure that you reduce the stitch length at that curve in order to prevent any fraying that might be possible. And as you move across the top of any of the pockets, make sure to backstitch well because those will be areas of high tension. And before moving on, you want to make sure that you sew a reinforcement stitch around the curves, which is a seam parallel to the seam that we just sewed. Then we'll move on to the other side of the honeycomb pouch, and then you want to just make sure that you push those honeycomb slots out of the way to make sewing much easier. Again, we are going to match up the top center seam and match up the corner and sew all the way around the second side of the pouch. Once you're all done, it is time to notch all of those corners. So you'll go and notch the main fabric as well as the lining, and I always like to use my serrated scissors. Now, if you have a machine that does not like these bulky layers, I'm showing you how to trim out the foam in your seam allowance. First, you just have to make sure that you get through any of the previous basting stitches. Then you can use a small set of scissors or these duck-billed ones to trim away the foam in that seam allowance. You will also want to make sure that you trim out the corners of any of your pockets. Again, you'll just have to release some of the previous basting stitches in order to get to those corners. Taking the time and removing some of this extra bulk is going to really pay dividends when you have to go and top stitch the bag later on. I went ahead and removed the rest of the foam out of the seam allowance, which I actually normally don't do with any of my bags, but I did it for you for this video. And then I continued to notch out all of the fabric along with the zipper. This will allow for a really nice smooth finish once you turn out the bag later on. Again, notching out the zipper is completely optional and you don't have to do it if you do not want to, but you just want to make sure that if you do notch them, that you seam seal either with seam sealant or with a little bit of heat. Now it's time to pull the full case right side out. You're going to start with the honeycomb slots because that is the majority of the bulk. Then you will pull out both sides of the case and then pull out the zipper. You'll notice that with the small version of the honeycomb case that you will be turning the pouch right side out through the corner cutouts. Always be careful pushing out the curves and make sure that the seam allowances are equally distributed so that you have a smooth finish. As we take a look at this case, you can see here on the right side, that's where we had notched, whereas on the left side, we did not notch the zipper tape. So the right side is a little bit smoother around that curve, where on the left side there is a little bit more sharpness because that seam allowance isn't being distributed evenly. It's kind of rippling up a little bit. The differences are very minor, but I just wanted to show you what happens when you do notch and when you do not notch at the zipper tape. Then it's time to press the entire case. I'm using my tailor's ham to get underneath the bag a little bit, and I can press those edges much more easily that way. And now it is time to close up the lining for only the medium and the large versions. What I'm doing now, I'm adding a small bit of glue to the seam allowance of the honeycomb slots. I'm going to show you the machine sewing method, which of course is very hard to describe through the written instructions. So this is something that I really wanted to show you through the video. With a thin layer of glue, you of course never want to use too much, because if the glue is very thick and heavy, it's going to affect the timing of your machine. Then you want to take the body lining and completely cover up the stitching on the honeycomb slots. I like to then pin in place, of course, to make sure that none of this lining shifts, because we are going to sew from the opposite side of the honeycomb slots. And then of course you got to make sure that all of that glue is dried up before you move on to your machine. Since we are going through a lot of layers here, and you will blindly be sewing with pins on the underside of your machine, feel free to just hand stitch this opening shut. So we will be stitching in the ditch along where the honeycomb slots meet the lining. In order to do this, we're going to have to fold the pouch, pulling the foam and the main body away from all of the lining. Then you want to make sure that you have your little hump jumper to start the seam, and the needle is going to go straight into that seam connecting the honeycomb slots and the lining. Remember, we are a little blind right now with the underside of the lining that we are trying to close up. So you want to move very slowly and know that you have a couple of pins underneath. So you want to make sure that you remove them before you sew them, so that you do not break a needle and cause issue with your machine. And you want to make sure that you just go through very slowly. You might need to increase your stitch length because we're going through a lot of layers at this point. Make sure to back stitch well, and then you can see that the stitches in the ditch are mostly covered, and then we are able to close up the opening in that lining. Now it is top stitching time. Find the bottom center seams, make sure that the seam allowances are all opened up, and then align those seams together. Make sure that the corner cutout edges are also completely aligned. Then you want to pin. I am going to combine basting the corner cutouts together along with top stitching the case. So I'm going to start with a top stitch appropriate stitch length. I think I'm at about a 3mm stitch length right now. I have my regular presser foot in, and I'm slowly sewing around the curve to make sure that that curve looks nice and smooth. As I move through the curves, you will notice that I lift my presser foot quite often in order to pivot the fabric. Again, that gives the top stitch a nice smooth look without being too sharp. Then once we get to the corner cutouts, you will want to backstitch and then change your stitch length to a basting stitch. So those are those long, nice stitches, and then we will baste the corners together. You are finished with the corner cutout, then you will change back to your top stitch length, and then finish top stitching the second side of the honeycomb case. Will of course baste the second corner cut out as well. As always, make sure to double check your work and make sure that no other fabric was caught in your top stitching seams. With those corner cutouts now basted all together, it's time to add in those zipper tabs. I'm going to sew in the ribbon ones we made, but if you made the fabric ones, you will have the same exact process. Match up those raw edges and then you will baste them in, which I have done off camera. Now we're ready to add in the zipper pulls. You want to make sure that the zipper teeth match each other, the corners match up, as well as the 1-inch markings that you made on the zipper tape. You can use either a fork, a zipper jig, or like what I'm doing, and I just use my hands to add in the zipper pull. You can see I'm struggling the slightest bit because I want to make sure that the teeth match up exactly, and I am just trying to shift the teeth so that they match up as I add on that pull. Now all of the teeth are aligned exactly as I like, and then I'm going to pull that first zipper head all the way down to make sure that the teeth are all aligned, and then I will add that second zipper pull onto the zipper tape. Again, I'm off by just one tooth, and I'm making sure that everything is completely aligned before I flip the case wrong side out. Then you will want to sew over the ends of the zipper tape to make sure that the zipper pulls do not fall off. But if you are a little adventurous like me, I just add some clips at the end, push in those zipper ends first to make sure that when I flip the case inside out that I am not going to lose those pulls. Then it's time to box all of these corners. You will want to make sure that that bottom seam of the body is matched up to the center of the zipper tape. All of the raw edges should match together, and then you are going to baste this corner, going through all layers, including that zipper tape. Now you will definitely be going through a lot of layers. This will be the bulkiest layer that you sew through, and that hump jumper is going to come quite in handy as you baste over all of the layers. Once you are done, you can snip off the excess zipper tape that is hanging and make sure that it aligns with the corner. Make sure to seal off your zipper tape, and then we will move on to binding. You will take your binding, match up the short edges together, and then cut the binding in half along that fold. Then you will fold in each short end by 1/4 inch. You can do this by measuring out 1/2 inch and then folding each of those short ends into that line you created. And as mentioned in the instructions, you can use some spray starch to make handling of the binding a little bit more easy. You can also see that I'm grabbing that school glue once again to put into the seam allowances, because once I fold them over, they will stay in place without the need of any pins or clips. Make sure to repeat everything with your second piece of binding, and then we will add it on to each of the corners. With the zipper facing up, you'll take your corner and the binding, and you want to make sure that the right side of the binding is lined up with the teeth, and you will make sure that everything is centered. Yes, the binding will hang off just a little bit, but you got to remember that you have a seam allowance. So once you start sewing, the edge of the binding should match up to where your needle goes down into that corner, and it will also end at where the binding meets the corner. You'll need your hump jumper for sure. Then you want to fold down the binding to fully enclose that seam allowance. Again, you want to make sure to cover up your previous stitching, and you can use a little bit of fabric glue to keep everything into place. And now we are going to sew through even more layers. Make sure that you have your hump jumper to get that presser foot level and started so that you can get some nice stitches. Again, you may need to increase your stitch length, or you may also need to hand crank your sewing wheel in order to carefully make it over the zipper teeth and also to get through these layers. Make sure you repeat the entire binding process with the other side of your honeycomb case, as you can see that I did here. Then you will push into those corners and turn the honeycomb case right side out. Just make sure to snip away all of the excess threads, push out those zipper tabs, and then give your bag one final press. Fill up your honeycomb case with all of your favorite things and you are ready to go. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Become a subscriber on my website newsletter and head to the description for all of the products and materials I used in this video.